Question: what are the correlations between schizophrenic and dissociative disorders and the spiritual causes of these issues? Well, that's a complicated topic. How can I explain it in a simplified way? I have talked about in several videos where we have an energy field beyond the physical body. And so it has three levels: the emotional, the mental, and the identity level. Beyond that, of course, there's the spiritual realm. It has our higher self. So I've also explained that the part of us, the core of our lower being, the core of what takes embodiment, is what I call the conscious you, which is neutral or pure awareness. But in order to take embodiment, the conscious you creates and merges with this identity, mental and emotional bodies, and then finally with the physical body. So in the process of doing this, the conscious you forgets who it is, that it's actually an extension of the higher self. And we can often, over many lifetimes, get pulled into identifying ourselves as a human being. Whatever that means in our particular culture, time, and society. You can see how it's changed over time. So, as part of this process, we often create what I've called these subconscious selves, which are like reactionary patterns in our subconscious mind. For example, you can have a self that if you don't get your way, you get angry. It's just a self that's pulling you into this reaction. And I've also explained that we start out as seeing ourselves as connected to something outside our own minds. But most people on earth have gone into the illusion that we are separate beings, a state of separation. And in this state, we experience the world through these subconscious selves. I mean, we don't really experience the world as it is or from a neutral perspective. We have the ability to do this, but we don't in most cases. So people are always looking through these conscious selves. And what also happens is that when we go into separation, we feel incomplete. And we use what I call the duality consciousness. And it always has two opposite polarities: right and wrong, good and bad, false and true, all these opposite polarities. And that means we're always in doubt. And it often seems to us like we make a decision to do one thing, we experience unpleasant consequences, so now we're confused. What did I do wrong? What can I do now? And so we try to do something else. We experience negative consequences, so now we are in more doubt. And this can lead to a point where people feel, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And this causes some people over lifetimes to come to a point where they don't want to make decisions anymore. They don't want to take responsibility for themselves. And if you don't want to take responsibility, if you, the conscious you, if you don't want to make decisions, it doesn't mean you go into a coma, right? But it means that something else is making decisions for you. And that is, in the first instance, it's the subconscious selves that you have in your individual energy field, in your subconscious mind. And there are people who don't want to make decisions, so they go into some kind of environment where they don't have to make decisions. You look back at the past, many of the monks and nuns who went into monasteries, they did it because they didn't want to make decisions. So here you go into an environment where everything is structured. From the moment you get up till you go to bed, you're told what to do. Some people go into the military. Other people go into a relationship where you have a person who doesn't want to make decisions, who pairs up with a person who likes to control others. And so the person who doesn't want to make decisions is told what to do. And don't have to make decisions. So there are many ways, and if you look at the world, you can see that a vast majority of people have some unwillingness to make decisions, and as a result of that, they put themselves in situations where they feel like they're victims because other people or circumstances or their job or the military or whatever is making decisions for them, telling them what to do. And they might complain about it. They might constantly feel they're oppressed or they're victims, but they really wanted this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone into it. And they wanted it because they didn't want to take responsibility for themselves. So you have this situation where many people are allowing other people or external circumstances to make decisions for them. But there are various levels of this, of how unwilling people are to make their own decisions. They go into more and more extreme levels of having outer things make decisions for them. And if you take that beyond the purely physical level, you understand, as I said, we have the layers of the energy field, but there's also a collective energy field. So there's a collective emotional body, a collective mental body, and a collective identity body. And in these collective fields, there are beings, various beings. And if you go to beyond a certain line of not wanting to take responsibility for yourself, you can open yourself up to these beings. So they take over, come into, they either have an influence on your energy field or they enter your energy field. And they directly can affect you. And there are various levels of these beings. At the basic level, we can say there's something called discarnate beings. And I talk about that in another answer, where I also talk about this old movie called Ghost, where there's a man who dies, he can't leave his girlfriend behind, so he goes into this intermediate state in the emotional realm, where he's still attached to the physical. And he wants to do something so to help his girlfriend, and he actually finds a psychic medium, Whoopi Goldberg, very funny, who he can take over her body and tell her girlfriend something through her. And this is an example of what can happen. You can have these discarnate souls who can't move on to higher realms, as near-death experiences explain. And they can take over somebody's body if they don't want to make decisions. And that's why you can have this, not only schizophrenic, but even multiple personality, split personality. You can even have people who, they are normally healthy, but then all of a sudden they go into another personality and now they have a physical disease, they have physical symptoms. I mean, there are documented cases of this. And this can be because there's a discarnate soul that comes into the body at certain times and it leaves at other times. And there could be more than one. I mean, some people can have many personalities. I can remember reading about somebody who had like 10 or 15 different personalities that they could identify. And, in the same way you talk about dissociation, you can say that people who are not wanting to make decisions, they dissociate themselves from what we could call real life or everyday life, where you make decisions. And they are dissociating themselves from the process, which I've talked about in several videos, where we are created to be co-creators. We are created to use our minds, our imagination to make decisions and see the consequences, learn from the consequences, and use it to raise our consciousness. But some people don't want to do that, so they dissociate from that process of growth. Okay, so back to the different levels. So these are the, we might say, the milder form is these discarnates. They're human beings. They usually have something they want to resolve, and it's possible that when they resolve it, they move on and leave you alone, leave the person alone. But then you have something called demons. And demons are entities, beings that exist in the emotional realm. And there are various kinds of them, but common to all of them is that they're very aggressive. And they want to take over people's minds. And, they can cause people to do all kinds of crazy things, all kinds of self-destructive things, because the demons, they can have various agendas, but one of their agendas is just to steal energy from people. And so when people do something really chaotic or really aggressive, they're forcing the person who's doing it to release energy or misqualify energy, but also people who are affected by what the person is doing to release energy, and the demons can suck that up. There's also something called what I call entities, which are usually associated with addictions. So there's an alcohol entity that simply wants people to drink and drink more and more, because then again it steals its energies. And this can also cause a certain, people who are really deeply alcoholic are in a way schizophrenic, because they can have multiple personalities. They can be nice as pie when they are not drunk, but as soon as they get drunk, they become very aggressive and mean, and So that's one kind. But then you can go up to the mental level, and there are also beings there, which I wouldn't really call them demons, because they're not quite as destructive, but they are more at the mental level, where they can take over people's minds and either use them to bring forth certain energies or just use them to sow doubt and confusion. You can see, for example, in the field of channeling, when there's some channelings, you can't really necessarily say they're saying something directly wrong, but it's very difficult to know exactly what they're saying. The sentences are often very unclear, very vague, have multiple interpretations. And the purpose of this is to create doubt in people's minds, so they don't know what to believe. And then once you have the doubt, you can have a projection of a certain viewpoint that you think, oh, this is a higher viewpoint, but it's actually hindering your spiritual growth. There are many, many ideas in the world, philosophers, political agitators who have been taken over by these beings in the mental realm and brought forth some kind of idea. Then there are fallen beings in the lower identity realm, and they are the ones who are the cleverest. And they have an agenda, as I've said before, of controlling people. They have an agenda of raising themselves up, proving themselves superior. They even want to prove themselves superior to God. Some of them want to prove that God was wrong for giving us free will. And they are often controlling the beings in the mental realm, controlling the demons in the emotional realm, and through that controlling people in embodiment. And you can look at some of the people, you can even look at history, and you can see that some of these world leaders that created warfare, chaos, murder, and mayhem, weren't they schizophrenic? Didn't they have almost multiple personality disorder? I remember reading an interview with Hitler's chauffeur, who for many years was driving Hitler. Wherever he had to go somewhere in a car, he was driving him. And he was saying that, he was the best employer you could ever have, and he would work for him again at any time. So you see, Hitler had a certain personality with certain people, but then he could order the extermination of 6 million people, and he couldn't see a contradiction there. He couldn't see a contradiction between being nice to his driver and shoving people into gas chambers. Now, no, he didn't shove people into gas chambers personally, but he still in his mind couldn't see a contradiction. Isn't that schizophrenic? Isn't that multiple personality disorder? And that's because Hitler's mind was partially taken over by beings in the emotional, mental, and identity realms. The same with many other people. You can see it today. You can see world leaders today. If you really look at it, you can see that they're actually schizophrenic. And, this may seem a little bit strange, because you look at Hitler and he was obviously not afraid to make decisions. He made a lot of decisions. But if you look more closely, you will see that some of these people, they are making decisions without really making decisions, because they're schizophrenic in the sense that they want to have power, but they don't want to be wrong. You often see this. The more people want power, the more they are afraid of being wrong. And this gives this strange idea, this strange dynamic, that they have people around them who are loyal to them and who will do anything they want. And without telling these people directly what to do, they are hinting at what they should do. You could say, if you look at Hitler, that he didn't directly make the decision and give the order to exterminate the Jews. But there were certain people around him, Himmler, Heydrich and others, that interpreted what the Führer said as the legitimization of creating the concentration camps. So in a sense, Hitler could say, oh, I wasn't really wrong because I didn't order them to do this, they just did it. But of course they only did it because he had them in his sphere of influence, in this vortex he had created, or the dark forces had created around him. And the same you can see with people today, who, you have the typical example of the mafia boss, who doesn't tell his underling to go and execute somebody, but just hints that he would like to get rid of that person because he's too much trouble. And then later he can, if he gets accused in court, he can say, I never told him to do it. And you can see this, in a certain court case that's going on right now in the United States, if you look closely. And so, anyway, where does that leave us? The correlations between schizophrenic and dissociative disorders from a spiritual perspective is that people don't want to make decisions, they don't want to participate in the process of expanding your consciousness by looking at the consequences of your actions and decisions. So they open themselves up to other beings, other entities that either influence them or even come in to the energy field and take them over. And that's simply the correlation. And I have even read about psychiatrists and psychologists who are dealing with people with schizophrenia and dissociative disorder and split personality. And some of them at least are open to the idea that it's almost like something from the outside comes into the person and takes them over. And I believe that in the foreseeable future, there will be more awareness of this. There will be a more awareness of the energy field, both individually and collectively. And when psychiatry becomes open to this, there will be treatment options that are rejected today because psychiatry is still holding on to a materialistic view, according to which everything I said here is nonsense. But there will come a point where psychiatry will say, well, it doesn't really matter whether this is real or not. We need to look at, can it help the patients? And this, I believe, can open up for a whole new approach to mental illness and mental disorders. Because, of course, as I've said before, if you individually see that you are suffering from this kind of disorder, you can at least attempt, I'm not saying you should not go into treatment with professionals, but you can attempt to use the tools of the Ascended Masters to invoke spiritual protection, to cut yourself free from these entities, and to work on these subconscious selves that make you vulnerable. Because it's like I've said before, these lower beings, they don't have any actual power over you other than what you give them. So you have to have an opening in your mind, in your subconscious mind, that they can come in through. And in a sense, you are inviting them without realizing it. You are inviting them because you have these subconscious selves. So you need to come to look at the subconscious self, look at these illusions, and let them go, and then you're not vulnerable to these forces. And then in the little longer run, you need to look at, why did you at some point decide you didn't want to make decisions, you didn't want to take responsibility for yourself? And if you can go through a process, and for some people it'll be a long process, I realize that, but it's a possible process. If you go through a process where you gradually take back your willingness to make decisions, where you take responsibility for your own growth, you can overcome these disorders. I mean, you absolutely can overcome them. It might take work, it might take an untraditional effort, but it definitely can be done. I mean, I've seen people do it. I have overcome so many things. I wasn't really schizophrenic. Some might disagree, but I've overcome a lot of things in my psychology that made me less vulnerable to these lower forces. And it's absolutely a real workable path. But it's basically, as I've described in all of my videos, it's the spiritual path. You're just following the spiritual path. You just might have to take some more extreme measures in terms of evoking light from the Ascended Masters. And it may be necessary for some people to also combine this with traditional treatment, where you have both, and you gradually work yourself to a point where you free yourself from this influence. See, once you get one of these external entities out of your energy field, everything shifts. Now you may have more than one, but it's definitely, when you get rid of one, it's definitely a shift up, and then you can keep going until you're free from them. And then you can be a normal human being who is walking the spiritual path.